very, very warm welcome to another live Action for Happiness event. It's fantastic to have so many of you joining us from all around the world. And what a delight it is to be joined today by Robert Mack. Robert, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's really exciting to spend this time together. I'm looking forward to sharing your inspiring ideas and work with this community. And as always, it's going to be a community event. So it's lovely to see so many people already welcoming each other on the chat from everywhere around the world. Let's keep it friendly, constructive and relevant and kind as we always do, folks. And after I've had a conversation with Robert for half an hour or so on today's topic of happiness and fulfillment, you'll then have a chance to ask questions. So please do use the Q&A function to post your question, or if you see someone else's question you love, then upvote it and we'll hopefully get a chance to come to that later on. And we're also going to have a few interactive things, as we often do, to keep you engaged, and we're looking forward to hearing your responses to that. But Robert, maybe you could start us off. I mean, you're an author, you're a positive psychologist, you do a lot of coaching and helping people around their happiness and well-being. Maybe you could say a bit more about your background and how you got to being here.
The long scenic route path, Mark. I am probably the least likely person in the world, in one sense, to be a happiness coach, because I was so deeply miserable and depressed and suicidal for so long. So it's ironic to me that I would be here talking about happiness and that I'd be feeling so happy, because that wasn't always the case in my life. I mean, for the better part of 26 years, I was really deeply unhappy and, like I said, suicidal.
Yeah, and I think that's really relevant. And I mean, I'm always grateful to see people's honesty, and what you find with a topic like happiness is it very often encourages us to talk about the opposite of that, really. And I guess maybe that's an interesting place for us to start today, because here we are in a world that's got so much suffering, actually, if we're honest, whether it's looking at war in Europe now, or the journey we've been through in a pandemic in the last few years, or indeed just the general challenges of living life as a human being, a parent, a friend, a partner, a colleague. There's a lot that makes life hard. Is it even relevant to be talking about happiness? Is this some utopian vision, or is it actually the very stuff of life we're talking about here?
What a great question. Without question, and I say this from the deepest, most authentic place in my heart, I can't imagine anything more helpful at this particular point in time, during this particular age. It's easy to get lost in the chaos, confusion, conflict, and the suffering of the world. Very understandably so. Lots of us are empaths, right? I know I've always been an empath. And so it's easy for me to get lost in that. And I also am crystal clear that if we want to help anyone else who is drowning, our drowning too does not help, right? Our suffering too doesn't help those who are suffering. In order to be of true help and assistance to people in the world, we want to be able to access that which they're having trouble accessing. So if it's peace, or if it's love, or it's joy, we want to be that change that we want to see in the world and that we want to see in other people. There are, of course, appropriate ways to do it. We want to meet people wherever they are, but it's more important now than ever that if we want to live in a happy, peaceful, loving world, that we be happy, peaceful, and loving ourselves. It's just critical.
Well said. And so I guess as we look around us in modern society, there's a sort of slightly inauthentic, materialistic version of happiness. It's about sort of having more, earning more, consuming, sort of joy and pleasure. And what I like about the title we've got this, for this event about happiness and fulfillment, is it sort of hints at something a bit deeper and richer than that. And I was reminded of a phrase that Marty Seligman, the founder of positive psychology, used, called authentic happiness. I don't know, does that speak to you? Because I feel like that's what we're trying to talk about here, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it definitely does. I studied Martin Seligman's work before I matriculated into that Master's of Applied Positive Psychology program, and then got to study underneath him. So I'm very familiar with Authentic Happiness as both a book and an experience. And I'm, of course, very sort of familiar with the opposite of that, either inauthentic happiness or very authentic unhappiness. And so I would say you're absolutely right. I think these days there's lots of talk about toxic sort of positivity, and there's lots of talk about a happiness that is maybe saccharine or inauthentic. But what we're talking about here, and what I really love diving into, is this deeper, fuller, honest experience of happiness that I sometimes call peaceful aliveness. It's a peaceful aliveness, or an alive peacefulness that I believe we all have access to all the time, but we don't always know we have access to it. And we certainly don't feel like we have access to it. So yes, the term authentic happiness speaks to me deeply and truly.
Mm. Well, before we can dive into some of the sources of that authentic happiness and also, get the community to share on that, I feel like we sort of need to address the elephant in the room to some extent, which is that there are quite a lot of things that get in the way of our happiness, whether it's ourselves or the situations we find ourselves in. And I wondered if we could maybe start in a sort of rather unhappy place, but let's start honestly and authentically by asking people to share some of the things that really sort of drain them or get in the way of that happiness. I think you've got a particular way you refer to those things. What do you call them?
Yeah, happiness valleys or happiness deserts, right?
Deserts,
They're
yeah.
just devoid of any real happiness or inspiration or joy, and sometimes love or peace. So your happiness valleys or happiness deserts.
So I see some people have already shown this on the chat, but if you'd like to, and again, we're not trying to start on a downer here, but I think it's important to be authentic. So I'm seeing people sharing death, illness, chronic pain, addiction, cancer, anxiety, physical pain, world politics, indecision, bullying, family problems, grief, technology, avoiding COVID, constant negativity, difficult relationships, financial pressures, boredom, war, wow, loneliness, not being able to let go of past events, can't sleep, poor health, workplace challenges, being busy, divorce, noise pollution, catastrophizing, depression. Wow, I mean, what a list. Robert, how are you feeling as you see that sort of human experience, really?
Well, that all of that, like clearly, there's a very self-aware sort of audience and participants here today. I will say that, with very few exceptions, I have at some point in my life felt depressed or unhappy about all of that, even as little as 6 or 7 years of age. So it's certainly understandable that we would feel less than happy or joyful if we're going through any of those experiences.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those, everyone. And I think, now we've held space for some of the things we're dealing with, we can hopefully talk a bit about positive ways forward. Not that we can get rid of that stuff. A lot of that stuff is things we can't change, whether it's about a health diagnosis or a work situation, loss of a loved one, but we can still choose how we respond. So I think maybe what you suggested as a nice follow-on from that, Robert, was what would you call the opposite of a happiness valley or a happiness desert?
Yeah, they would be our happiness islands, right? They're just these like little beautiful sweet spots in our lives. They're usually places or activities or things that make us feel inspired or uplifted, excited to be alive for their own sake. We just love them for their own sake. So yeah, our happiness islands.
Okay, that's lovely. So let's share some of our happiness islands, everyone. Feel free again to engage in the chat. I'm seeing my allotment, my sisters, hugs, my garden, art, bird song, friends, nature, exercise, reading, grandchildren, hiking, singing. Oh, I was singing in a choir last night. I very much agree with that one. My beautiful little boy, my puppy, hearing birds, the beach, creating a cup of coffee with friends, looking at the sea on a sunny day, stopping and breathing, dancing, relaxing, singing, human connection, being asleep, cats, friends, flowers, pets, mindfulness. I don't know I think I saw cycling there. That would certainly be one of mine. Playing, yoga, music, hiking. These happiness webinars. Thank you so much to whoever said that. That's lovely to hear. Children's laughter. Gosh, that's a lovely one. And so much more. I'm feeling really uplifted seeing that list. What's on your mind, Robert?
Oh my goodness, totally. It's like I would love to schedule all of us to schedule more of those happiness islands into our daily existence in life, and schedule out of our life as many of those happiness valleys as possible. But so many of the things that people share here, I mean, for sure, there's resonance for me around, I mean, all these things. It's like animals and toddlers sleeping and big smiles on people's faces. Like, just love it. I mean, it's amazing how just a few words can make you feel uplifted because there's something there that resonates.
So how does this link, how do these happiness islands, and why does this matter? Or how does it link to like positive psychology and how happiness maybe can be a source of strength in our lives, not just as a sort of pleasurable experience, but maybe helping us be better at life and be better humans and be better for each other?
Totally. So positive psychology is really a science, right? It's a time-tested, face-valid, empirical science and study of what makes life worth living. It's really the science of happiness. So science, the science of happiness, of course, is a science first and foremost, but it's also an art. So it's something you have to customize and tailor fit for yourself in your own life. None of us really are living, walking, talking averages, right? We're all each of us is an individual. And so we want to make sure that we're authentic in our happiness journey. And so the happiness islands let us get in touch with what we genuinely, truly feel inspired by, uplifted by, or energized by. The science of positive psychology really tells us where, if we were to gamble with respect to happiness, where do we want to gamble, right? So there's lots of talk in positive psychology. And the way I would sort of simplify it is that happiness is the greatest success because it's the reason we want success. You know, no matter what we want to achieve, accomplish, or acquire, we want it really only because we think we'll feel better for having it, right? It's a feeling that we're kind of ultimately after. So happiness is the greatest success, but it also leads to success. And on the other side, the things that we think of as success, so successful life conditions and circumstances, even health of the body, great relationships, you know, great kids, those things, believe it or not, don't really lead to the lasting, meaningful, and abiding happiness that we're all ultimately after, right? So success doesn't lead to happiness. Happiness does lead to success, and happiness is the greatest success. But the happiness islands are one little variable that we want to take into account.
I love that. And I love the fact that while you've been talking, there've been more happiness islands just popping up, gardening, poetry, sunshine. People are still sharing them. So that's great. I've heard you talk about sort of 4 different stages. So obviously what we want to do, and what I'm sure the audience are keen here to do, is to put this into practice. So not only can we identify the things we already do, but what more can we do to build this into our lives in an authentic, lasting way? You've talked about 4 different stages. I wondered if you might sort of take us through those and how we can use that.
Absolutely. So the first stage generally in our happiness journey is all about happy actions or happy activities. So those are the happiness islands, right? So we're wanting to schedule into our life more of our happiness islands, and we're wanting to reverse engineer out of our life most or as many as we can happiness valleys or deserts, right? So that means outsource, delegate, reduce, eliminate, automate, or regulate as many of your valleys or deserts as humanly possible. So that's step 1. Step 2 is really
that's
about
a lovely fit with what we do with Action for Happiness, because as I'm sure you've seen, we have these monthly themes and calendars and daily actions, which are basically little things you can try on a daily basis to do that. But I love how you're going to build from there. So, okay, we've got some habits, we've got rid of some of the unhappiness, we've got some things that give us a bit of a boost. What's the next stage?
Yeah, so sort of the second stage is sort of happy people, right? Or at least people that aspire to be happy. And so the one sort of, I'd say, most meaningful contribution that positive psychology has to offer to this conversation is that other people matter, and they matter a great deal. Relationships matter, not just or even mainly romantic relationships, but social support in general. And so you're wanting to do what you can to schedule into your life more of the happy people or the supportive people or the loving people. And you're wanting to really reverse engineer out of your life the people that don't really have an aspiration to either be happy or generally aren't very happy. The surprising thing about happiness is that the happiest person generally doesn't pull the least happy person up. It's the least happy person that pulls the happy person down in terms of their happiness. And so other people matter a great deal with respect to happiness and unhappiness.
One of the things I love in this community is the kindness that I see, that people recognizing that a lot of their own happiness comes from helping others. And you know, we all want to cultivate better relationships, but actually relationships can be really, really hard, can't they? Especially with some of our nearest and dearest and loved ones. I mean, a thing that made a big difference for me was learning to be a better, I'm not going to say a good, but a better listener. Sort of getting out of the way of what I want to say and actually really tuning into the other person's needs. But it's still a work in progress. What are some of your tips for how to really sort of cultivate good relationships and help sort of create happier people
Yes,
environments?
it's such a great question. I mean, and this is where the research gets really interesting too. And I'll share my personal experience on top of it. But happy people are kinder people, but kind people are happier people. It's a positive upward spiral between happiness and kindness, right? Happy people donate more money and time and energy to social causes they care about and to individuals in need. But also, those kind, charitable individuals become happier as a result of that, right? So yeah, they feed each other in really powerful ways. With respect to relationships, I'm a firm believer that what I'm mostly wanting to bring to an experience is unconditional regard. You know, I have infinite weaknesses, countless weaknesses. Judgment hasn't tended to be one of them. I don't know, it's sometimes even gotten in the way, I think, maybe of my life because I'm not a good judge of character, so to speak. But it's not a priority for me as much as holding space or being a sort of paragon of unconditional regard, non-judgment, unconditional love.
That
So for
means sort
me,
of just kind of letting people be who they are rather than trying to change them. Is that kind of what you're saying?
yeah, I don't have any interest in changing anyone. I don't know what's best for anyone. I don't know what's best for me. I'm clear about that. So I just let people be who they're being and show up in the way they want to show up. And then I decide how I'm going to participate in that or not.
That's very powerful. I think we could spend a whole hour talking about just that. But we talked about two of your stages. So there's the actions and activities, people and relationships, other people matter. I love that phrase. What's the third? What's next in your little journey?
So the third piece is just happy thoughts, right? And that's really about telling better feeling stories based in truth about everything and everybody in your life, starting with yourself, right? So instead of vetting thoughts only based on whether or not they're true, we also want to vet thoughts and conversations based also on whether or not they're helpful or supportive in us feeling what we want to feel or achieving what we want to achieve. There are lots of things that are true in the world, but focusing on them won't make you happier, and you won't necessarily benefit anyone by doing so either. So it's about telling better feeling stories based in truth. Really, it's about happy thoughts.
So one of the things I've been surprised by in the work we've done with Action for Happiness over 10 years now is how many really kind, generous, thoughtful people actually have really, really, I would say, toxic sort of inner voices. They're kind and warm on the outside, and yet they're saying to themselves, and I find myself doing this to myself, saying like, you're not good enough, you're an idiot, you messed that up, you're not enough in some way. And I've been really shocked to see how common that is. I mean, in some ways it's quite humanizing to know that we all deal with that to some extent. But if there's someone here listening today who's going through that I'm not good enough, how can we? I mean, we may know that's not true, but how do we shift that story in our head?
That hits me right in the heart. I mean, that was really the crux of what I struggled with when I was so deeply depressed and suicidal. Still have the suicide test marks on my wrist because I had this. I have a friend that calls it your inner crackhead.
Yeah.
And it's just that little demon inside, that little self-critical voice. And we all struggle with that at certain points. And that's not our fault. Part of it is sort of nature, right? We're born and wired with a brain that cares mostly about survival and not only about happiness. But if you survive, the chances of you being happy is much better. But then there's also the nurture part, right? So we're often, born into a society in a world and into families that are critical, and we internalize that self-criticism. So you can turn that around. There's no question about it. You just have to want to turn it around more than anything else. You have to want to be happy and at peace and to feel love and self-love more than you want anything else, more than you even want to be right? That's just critical. And if you can have that kind of commitment where you want happiness above all else, you'll find that you start to turn it around a lot more quickly than you could otherwise.
Yeah, I find it really helpful. I don't really believe in mantras so much, but I find the thing I say to myself is, you're doing okay, you're okay as you are. It's not like you're fine, it's not like you're perfect, but it's also not that you're messing up, you're an idiot, you've let people down. It's just sort of like, you're okay, you're doing the best you can. And I find that really just sort of disarms a lot of the inner critic.
I love that. I also used a self-love journal, which was like every day I would just bullet out 2 or 3 things that I genuinely liked and loved about myself. And every night I try to come up with something new. Oftentimes I couldn't come up with very much at all, but I still tried it. And if you can just be consistent with that, you can literally rewire your brain to do it much less effortfully, much more easily, and much more enjoyably in about 22 to 66 days. So yes, either practice works. The key is to prioritize consistency over intensity.
So let's keep moving because I'm really enjoying this. So we've had actions, we've had people, we've had thoughts. You said there were 4. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, so happy actions, happy people, happy thoughts. And the final one is happy no thoughts, right? Positive no thoughts. And so what I discovered in my happiness journey is that even when I'm doing the happiest activity, I'm with the most loving or supportive people, I'm working on telling a better feeling story based in truth, and I'm trying to think happy or positive thoughts, there still can be unhappiness underneath there. You can still often feel depressed or stressed or anxious. And so what I discovered was that I was working really hard at this happiness thing. And while I wanted to continue doing the happy things and spending time with happy or supportive or loving people and entertaining the happier story, I also realized that I could find a much more direct path to happiness by being still and silent in moments, right? That I didn't need to always think all the time. I saw somebody in the chat earlier speak about overthinking as a happiness valley or desert. And there's no question about it. Most of us humans are overthinkers and overanalyzers, and we self ruminate entirely too much. We think it's processing, but we're mostly just repeating, reliving, and pre living all of the potential problems or fears that we could or have experienced in our life.
I love that call to sort of stillness. I slightly reluctantly at first, but now many, many years ago, sort of began a meditation practice, which is a sort of my particular way of trying to turn off the thoughts is the wrong thing, but be at peace with the thoughts and then just sort of like find a quieter space. And I think there's something about this word acceptance, which is there's lots we can't change, but we can at least be at peace with how things are, even if they're imperfect. Is that what you found has developed for you?
Absolutely. Like, you know, that moment right before you slip off to sleep at night where you're so tired that you don't really want to move, and you've sort of forgotten about your fears, even your desires. You've forgotten about the world, everybody in the world. You've forgotten about yourself. That micro moment before you slip off to sleep, your mind is just so quiet. And in that quiet, in that stillness and silence, is a blissful, sort of sublimely blissful experience of peace or peaceful aliveness. That experience is something we can have all the time, or certainly much more frequently and regularly than we're having now, simply by noticing that you have thoughts, but you're not your thoughts. So can you just observe or notice the thoughts you're having without getting so caught up in all of them or any of them? Can you just sort of watch them the way you watch clouds in the sky, not overinvest, just notice, and then bring your focus and attention back to your body, back to the place inside that is always perfectly at peace. And at first, it might be a space or place in your body. It might simply be about breathing from the stomach, but you'll discover that if you can focus more on the experience of the body as opposed to the explanations in the brain, you'll feel more peacefully alive, happier, more joyful, and loving without nearly as much effort. And over time, you get better and better at it, and it becomes automatic.
Of course, that's I think why so many mindfulness practices encourage us to focus our attention on the breath or on the body, because it helps disarm some of those thought patterns. I think modern society doesn't help us here. We don't really have a non-doing mode, do we? There's a lot of screens and attention, and and the next generation struggle, I think, even more than we do. I find for me, when I'm out on my bicycle, I cycle everywhere. That is my kind of meditation on two wheels, when my brain isn't doing anything in particular apart from just kind of getting me from A to B and trying not to crash.
Yes.
um, yeah. So what's your way of finding happy no thoughts? Do you have a particular practice?
I love that. A lot of the happiness islands, actually, if you'll notice, are precisely that. It's like being in nature. It's like being with kids. It's like being with animals. It's riding the bicycle. All those things allow us to access that flow state that is really a state of less discursive thought, if not no discursive thought, right? So for me, same deal. I love exercise. I love being out in nature. I love what I call practice the presence of God. Sometimes I just call it a micro meditation, but it's like just breathing from the stomach for the joy of it, like it's my last breath ever. That's been one of my most enjoyable and I guess effective practices. But for me, it's mostly the exercise. And of course, I love reading, but that doesn't
Say a bit more about the last breath ever, because at one level that sounds a bit sort of morbid, but actually you said it's very joyful. What's going on there?
Yeah. So, I used to, of course, be tortured by this thought of death. And it drove me to actually suicide because I didn't want to suffer so much. And I've come to, I guess, discover that so much of that was just overthinking. And that if I'm really in my body and if I'm really in the moment and I simply pretend like this is the last breath or last moment we'll ever have on this planet, and be sincere about it, and then try to milk or juice this one moment, this one breath, for as much joy as you can possibly squeeze out of it. And you can do that best simply by breathing from the stomach, letting all your thoughts go, and just trying to simply and purely enjoy just being and breathing. That micro meditation sounds so small and so paltry, but you can do it and practice it all day long, no matter what else you're doing. you're in conversation with people, especially if they're boring, if you're swiffering, you're folding clothes. But yes, a micro meditation. It's one of my favorite tools.
I feel like this is all bringing us towards the topic of that we've named today's event about happiness and fulfillment. I feel that a lot of this is a journey towards fulfillment. It's sort of finding things that make us happy, getting rid of some of the unhappy sources, and then going a bit deeper. So let's talk a bit about fulfillment. Some of us are after a kind of experiential, sort of pleasurable form of happiness, but actually, what I think many of us realize is a lot of happiness comes from a sense of contribution and connection and being part of something bigger. How do you see fulfillment in that sense?
Yeah, it's a great point you make. I think in the beginning of my happiness journey, it seemed like happiness was either a lifestyle status at first, and then it was maybe an activity state or state of activity. And then you go beyond that and you realize maybe it's a state of relationship. And then you're like, that's not that either. Because the same person that used to make me so happy now makes me miserable, or vice versa. And you graduate and say, maybe happiness is it's a state of thought or a state of mood. But then you even graduate from that and realize maybe happiness is just a state of being. It's just a state of being. And so it includes not just pleasurable experiences and pleasurable or pleasant emotions, but it can include also really unpleasant or unpleasurable emotions and moods. That there's something within us that's thoughtless, wordless, faceless, and formless that I'll simply call awareness or consciousness itself, that is aware that we have a mind, but we're not a mind. We have a body, but we're not a body. That thoughtless, wordless awareness, when we recognize it, provides a deep, rich, authentic experience of being that I would describe as fulfillment. Now, it's easy to get caught up in semantics and argue about which word should be referring to which experience. And so it's not the word that matters so much, it's the experience that the word is pointing to that matters so much. And so I might call it success, and you might call it blue pearls, and somebody else might call it fulfillment. But at the end of the day, the kind of happiness I think we're talking about here, certainly that I'm talking about, is a kind of happiness that even includes and allows for moments or experiences of depression or sadness on the surface, but a recognition at a deeper level that underneath all of that is perfect peace and perfect bliss and perfect love. It's sort of like an ocean. If you only focus on the surface, it's going to be lots of tumultuous experiences. If you can dive deep enough, there's only an experience of perfect peace underneath the surface of the water.
I find that really moving and profound, and it sort of hints at a sort of deeper spiritual conversation. I mean, I know many in this community may have their own faith, many others are sort of agnostic or have no particular religious conviction. But I do sense that in some ways what you're hinting at here is also brings up for me not only an inner peace, but a sort of sense of connectedness. Not necessarily in a relational sense, but the fact that there is something really precious about life and being alive, and that we have some kind of shared common humanity, common life force that is within us. And whether we're religious or not, there's something quite reflective about that and powerful, and making us sort of, again, feel part of something bigger.
You just nailed it, right? So ultimately, at the end of the day, the one thing we know from the science of positive psychology, but just psychology in general, and also probably our personal experiences, is that when we get outside of ourselves, right, and we're able to contribute in meaningful ways to other people's lives or the world, we not only help them feel better, but we feel better too, right? And this deeper recognition of what we might call just the simple naked awareness of your own existence or life intelligence, whatever it is that hangs the earth on nothing, is also within us. And so a recognition that that same life energy is within everyone else as well allows us to feel a connectedness and a love and a connection with other people that we know and also people that we don't know. I sometimes just call that love, but really it's an expression of your happiness at the deepest level. It's an expression of fulfillment at the deepest level. And so you're absolutely right about that, Mark. Whether you approach it from this sort of deeper place of feeling deep, truly fulfilled on the inside, and then sharing that or recognizing that with other people, or you hit it from the top and do what you can to support others in meaningful ways and contribute to the world and to other people's sort of happiness or well-being. It both sort of feeds and serves the same purpose.
So I would love us to hear a little bit from the community again. I find it very moving to see all the kind of the sources of unhappiness and the happiness islands. Maybe we could ask a question about fulfillment. So turning back to you, everyone in the chat, how would you define a sense of fulfillment for yourself? as Robert said, it's quite personal, but it could be about our connection to nature or to each other or to a spiritual belief or to a cause or to a particular route to inner peace. So let's see what comes up. Being at peace with myself, making someone else's life easier, heartful connectedness. I love that phrase. Feeling valued, genuine relationships, peace, purpose every day, embodiment, inner calm, freedom, helping others, meditation, walking on a nice day, feeling free in my head, being loved, feeling aligned, being the best version of myself, kindness, using my skills to make a contribution, memories of positive experiences, compassion, feeling appreciated, helping others, learning every day, contentedness. Wow, you people are awesome.
Yes, quite incredible, actually. And they just keep coming in. I mean, it's incredible the diversity in experience there and how well people speak to this, right? We all have an intuitive and direct hit around what it means to feel fulfilled. And so it's indicative that there's something there already that knows and recognizes fulfillment when it, experiences it.
I want to get on to the great questions from the audience soon, Robert. I'm still loving the fact that there's all these fulfilling ideas coming past. I like this one, doing the best that I can and then letting go. I think that's really powerful. It's a lovely combination of sort of striving and acceptance all into one there. Really nice. There are lots of us, I would say right now, but I don't want to keep making it out that this is the worst time ever, because of course life's always been hard and probably always be hard as long as there are humans alive. But there are people right now who are really struggling with loss, with uncertainty, with grief, with maybe even sort of depression, anxiety, difficult feelings, maybe not sure if they can carry on. It's quite easy for us to talk about think happy thoughts and try and find fulfillment, but of course it can be sometimes really hard to just even take a positive step forward in those difficult situations. It sounds like you've been there yourself, Robert. So what can you share in terms of, how to take that next step?
Yeah. So first and foremost, there are people in the world who have solved the very problem that you're struggling with the most. So whether it's depression, whether it could be finances, it might be relationships, it might be health issues. There are people in the world who have dedicated their entire lives not only to solving that problem for themselves, but solving for others. So reach out to anybody and everybody and to every resource and any resource that you can find that feels supportive or could be supportive to you. That's the first thing. Like, you don't need to do this thing alone. And that's the beauty and value of being a part of such an incredible community like this. That's number one. And number two, as part of that, is just remembering that you're not alone ever in it. And there are much more people that are familiar with the experience of depression and unhappiness and deep dysphoria and suicidal ideation than you probably will ever know. Because most of those folks don't speak to it. I didn't speak to it for a long, long time. I didn't share with even the closest people, that loved me the most. So please know that. So those are the first two most important things. And then there's a ton of science that sort of let us know where we might lean into if we desired. But I'd say those are the first two most important steps.
Thank you. And I would add that, if you are struggling at the moment, please do reach out for help. There are so many people there to help and support. And if you haven't already joined the Action for Happiness app community, go to any of the app stores, download our app. Loads of great ideas and inspiration, links to where you can get support, but also just a really friendly community of people sort of helping each other with friendly suggestions and ideas. So you get a bit of the feel of community we've got here today, but on a daily basis in your pocket. That's great, Robert. It's been really great exploring this stuff. Let's get on to some of these questions then, because there's some really interesting stuff coming up. Caroline's asked something which I find quite a challenge actually, and really, really thought-provoking. So the thing about happy people suggests that we might want to sort of edit out the people who aren't creating happiness in our lives, the toxic people who are bringing us down. But she's made the point, doesn't that also mean giving up on some people in our lives who might actually need happiness and our empathy and our kindness the most?
Absolutely. Love that so much. And so the key point there is this person wanting, aspiring to feel better, right? And so we just use these words like happy people just to make it simple. But the idea is people who are either supporting or trying to support you and or themselves in being happy and being happier. Some people don't seem to ever have any interest in being happy at all, and they just want to make you miserable. Those are the people you want to be careful about and be careful around. And it doesn't mean you have to cut anybody out of your life at all. It just means that you want to secure your own oxygen mask first before attempting to secure the oxygen mask of others. When I was really struggling with depression and suicidal ideation, I did not have the psychological, physical, emotional, or spiritual bandwidth to hold space for anybody else. I was already spiraling. And so me in my drowning, trying to save somebody else who was drowning was disastrous for us both. And so it's not that I cut people out of my life necessarily, but what I did do is I made our interactions sweeter and shorter. And I was able to love people from a distance in a way that I couldn't otherwise. And so we can support people in all kinds of ways. We don't only support people by being up in their business all day, every day, and trying to pull them out of the depression. Sometimes we support people best by sending them some resources and then finding our center again and then coming back, right? And so you do want to be intentional and selective, but it doesn't mean ever putting anyone outside of your heart. Let's just be clear about that. It's just about making sure that you are in a safe, secure, stable, strong place so that you can continue to support others in the world. And that means some self-care.
I'm reminded of that phrase about the kind of oxygen mask principle on a plane. You know, you can't really help others unless you've also kind of put your own mask on first. So something about this is about being in a better place to be more help of others because you've kind of been able to look after your own mental well-being first.
That's right. I mean, you ultimately want and need, you want to be the happiness or peace or love that, and you want to be able to access that consistently, especially when people in your life aren't able to access it. So if you can't be that consistently, you need to take some space or take some time, step aside, take a break, come back, once you've sort of replenished and restored and refreshed yourself in that way. That's mostly what it means. And it also means be careful. There are lots of people that maybe unwittingly, unconsciously, unintentionally are toxic, and that will not be good for your happiness.
The question that's currently sitting at the most upvoted on our list, and please do vote, folks, for any questions you see that you like, is from Clifford. And I just wanted to, first of all, say thanks to Clifford, because Clifford's been to quite a lot of these events and regularly asks questions. But it's reminded me something I forgot to say at the start, Robert, which is you are our 50th guest on this event series. Since lockdown started and we moved to doing these online events, we've had 50 fantastic guests. So thank you for marking this special occasion for us. And we've been joined by, I think, 240,000 people live since we started this event series and had these lovely community encounters. So thank you to everyone who's here tonight, who's been before. And if it's your first time, please do come back. And if it's your 40th time, whatever, let's keep this going. But Clifford asked, so I've now lost his question. Sorry, Clifford says, quite a poignant thing really, which is, why does it happen that whenever something makes me happy, a little while later I'm overwhelmed with a sudden sadness? Is that a feeling you've experienced?
Yeah, so this is such a powerful and poignant question. There is a type of happiness we might call dualistic happiness. This is where the pleasure is balanced by the pain, and every time you have experience of pleasure, you experience the pain. It's the hangover effect, right? And so we want to be careful of that. And so we're going to have that experience. Anytime we chase pain or try to avoid, or chase pleasure or try to avoid pain, we're going to experience the other side of that in time. There's another kind of happiness, and I'd call it the true happiness, which is a non-dual kind of happiness that doesn't require this contrast effect, this like ebb and flow experience all the time. It honors that and allows for that experience. But underneath that, sort of between, beyond, above, and below that, is this peaceful aliveness that always knows all is really well, right? So that's the kind of happiness that I speak to. We start with this sort of dualistic experience of happiness where pleasure is balanced by pain and cost by benefits. But you'll notice that as you deepen and continue to deepen in your happiness practice, you'll come to a place where you'll experience more consistently this non-dualistic or non-dual joy or peaceful aliveness that doesn't just come, visit for a while, and leave. It's there in a lasting, meaningful, and abiding way, and you can't escape it because it's not only within you, it's who and what you truly are, right? It's your true nature. So that's the kind of, it's like such a great question because that is an important distinction.
And of course, emotionally, life is a bit of a roller coaster, and pushing away our negative emotions doesn't really help us. We sort of noticing them, accepting them, and moving on is probably more helpful. But this sort of bridges to a question from Andy, which I think is really interesting as well. So Andy's asked, how does expectation of having happiness actually cause us suffering, or does it actually cause us suffering? And I think there is a point you've already touched on here, which is there's this bit of toxic positivity. We're like, we should be happy. It's your right to be happy. And if you're not feeling happy, it's somehow your fault, or life's gone wrong in some way. But as you've pointed out, it's not realistic. Life's full of trauma and loss. And, so I think Andy's onto a good point, that modern society almost puts a pressure on us to like have the perfect life. But that isn't really what happiness is about. How do you see that?
That's beautifully said. Pain, physical pain is inevitable, but psychological, emotional, even what we might call spiritual suffering is always optional, right? So that means that we have a lot more control than we think we do. There's the experience itself, and then our thoughts about the experience, right? Our judgments about the experience. The vast majority, if not all of this suffering, right, that exists on the planet is maybe initially seems precipitated by some painful experience or event, but it is maintained and sustained by this discursive thinking, this overthinking, by a mind that simply can't sit still and be quiet for a while, right? And so in other words, the point is that most of the suffering we experience comes as a result of reliving an experience that we had in the past, or pre-living an experience we might have in the future, right? Every moment only really needs lived once. Nothing wrong with a little rumination, nothing wrong with a little bit of reflection, nothing wrong with savoring experiences, but you want to be real careful to sort of discern between that which is pain, right, and that which is suffering. And suffering we have a lot more control over than we do pain.
Well said. Kate has asked a question, back to people again. How can I stop other people affecting my happiness? My happy bubble seems too easy to burst. And she's also said a big thank you to you and how much she's loved this talk. But I've got a thought on this, which is because it's something I struggle with. I find that if I feel like I've let someone down, it really affects my happiness. But what are your thoughts on how because we are relational beings, aren't we? We do care about our connection to others, and that can be a bubble bursting experience.
Yeah, so I'm going to say something, and I'm going to please assume positive intent here. Okay, I'm coming from the heart. I struggled with that a ton. I mean, most of my life, really. I think that probably all of us here have struggled with that. And I've come to the recognition that part of my job in this world is to disappoint everyone as quickly as humanly possible, right? Like, my expectations are my job. Your expectations are your job. And the faster I can disappoint you and remind you of that in soft ways, I don't need to teach and preach, right? But if I can remind you of that by not people pleasing, right? And by showing you through my living, shining example that I can be happy no matter what, or at peace no matter what, or self-loving or loving no matter what, then I'm going to provide the perfect opportunity for you to learn to do the same. In our people pleasing, right, what we often do is we actually do a great injustice and disservice to other people because we lead them away from the source of peace, love, and happiness that exists within them all the time. So when you're successful in your people pleasing, you're encouraging someone, you're training someone, you're teaching someone to depend on you for their peace, love, and happiness. And that's a great injustice and disservice that we do, because that is not going to serve them when we're not around, when we can't get to the phone, when something happens and we just can't be available. So yes, it's a very tough thing. Part of what I've realized is that in your experience with people, one of the things that's worked for me is to keep always part of my attention inside. So I never give 100% of my attention to anyone if I can remember to do so. I trip up all the time, and I'm human, so I definitely do. But I always set an intention to keep part of my attention inside myself, in that place where there is peaceful aliveness or perfect peace at all times, right? One simple way to do that is just to simply breathe from the stomach as often as you can, no matter who you're with or what you're doing, but especially when you're with someone who's challenging or depressed or unhappy.
Wow. Yeah, I've sometimes talked about myself as a recovering people pleaser, still a work in progress. One thing I found really helpful was I found that if I have if I feel like I've been criticized in some way, that to me translates as I'm a bad person, I've let someone down. And I tend to go on the defensive to try and prove how I'm not that bad person. And so I turn sometimes what is just someone else expressing that their pain that they're going through into a perceived, like I've let them down, and then sort of defending myself. And I almost like create a conflict where there isn't any. And a really wise phrase that's helped me there is, behind every criticism, there is a wish. So tune into the wish, not the criticism. So like when my partner says something that I might think of as a critique, I think, well, what's her need here? Not how am I being criticized here? And then I don't necessarily act on that need. I can do, but at least I'm aware that it's more about where she's at than where I'm at. I mean, I'm just using that as an example. And I find that really liberating, because it's like, okay, there's the stuff that's my stuff and the stuff that's someone else's stuff. And I have a little bit more choice than I thought I had here. Is that making any sense?
Oh, it makes total sense. It's extraordinary. You're absolutely right. Resentment is really envy. It doesn't look like that, but it is, right? And so sometimes we get criticized for things that, like you said, people want or wish that they had or could do or whatnot. And so just beautifully said. I couldn't agree with you more.
We've got a question here from Diane, which is a topic you've touched on already about depression, but I think it's something that people, want to know more about, and many in this community will have had personal experience or have loved ones that are dealing with, difficult state of mental health. And Diane has just said depression seems to run in the family, in her case for generations. It feels like a never-ending struggle for my near and extended family. Have you got any advice?
Yeah. So I will say, to support what she's saying there, scientists have come up with a happiness formula. H equals S plus C plus B. The S is genetic set point. So 50% of our happiness is actually wired. We're wired for it. It's genetic. It's DNA code. Now, different from height or eye color, our happiness wiring is perfectly malleable and changeable. It can be improved, right? So this unhappy gene and depression, sort of depressed gene that you feel like you might have, is not something you cannot change. In fact, you can change it, and you can change it dramatically and significantly. So that's the first thing, most important thing to remember. The second thing is that, and can you remind me of the question again, Mark? That's the nuance.
I've just moved it off screen now, but it was just acknowledging that depression is something that she and her loved ones have been dealing with, and just asking for advice. And I think, we've already talked about some things here, reaching out for help. I think actually, finding your happiness islands, focusing on relationships that support you, trying to sort of change your relationship with difficult thoughts, and then getting into positions of non-thinking. Those 4 stages you took us through seem potentially helpful, but of course, nobody ever chooses to be depressed. You can't just wish yourself out of it. It's a very clearly defined medical condition in many cases that actually requires proper clinical support in many cases as well.
Absolutely. And I will back that up and say, in addition to that I had an advantage. Sometimes we don't see it this way, and I didn't see it this way. When you're so deeply depressed, and like I was suicidal, that you get to a place where I was literally like, I'd rather either die or live blissfully ever after. Sometimes that laser focus is very, very helpful. So the great thing and beautiful thing about being depressed is that you're crystal clear that happiness or joy matters more than anything else in the world. If you can double down on that, that's the most important thing. Then you have this laser focus, and that laser focus is power, right? There's real power in that kind of simplicity. And then when you prioritize that above everything and everybody else, the journey becomes easier. That being said, you want to start with the low-hanging fruit. Don't start with the most difficult practice. So whatever practice it is that resonates with you personally, that helps you, start there. For me, it was moving. I literally just need to move and change environments. I actually had a job I didn't like. I quit the job. I thought any of these things is better than going down this other path, which is suicidal. So I did all these things. They were, for me, low-hanging fruit. And then what happens is you take this one step. We all want to see the whole staircase, but you just need to see and take the one step in front of you. There's something right now that for sure would make you feel just a little bit better. It's like, maybe it's going to the gym. Maybe it's calling the counselor or therapist. Maybe it's picking up that book again that you kind of liked but got bored of. But you pick that one thing that for sure could help you a little. And then before you know it, the entire staircase begins to light up on its own. So that's a critical part of it. The other part of it, and I'll stop here, is that you don't want to judge your progress based on how you feel every day. Because for me, it was like 2 steps forward, and then it would feel like 1,000 steps back. And so I would say, oh, I'm not getting anywhere. But once I put that aside and said, you know what, I'm just going to continue putting one foot in front of the other, and I'll check back in a couple of months. I'm just going to do my best. Some days my best meant taking a nap. You find that you make a lot more progress a lot more quickly when you stop planting a seed and then uprooting it to see if the plant is growing.
Mm. Thank you, Robert. Just to add to that, I mean, we will send some links out in our follow-up email tomorrow with resources where you can go and seek extra help and support. And for many people, if you're in a state of depression, actually being able to have maybe even a pharmaceutical intervention, therapeutic intervention is the beginning of the ability to just cope with day-to-day life and find the energy to do that one step forward. But I like to remember that some of what we might think of as life's basics do really help here, and wherever we are on the sort of well-being spectrum. Trying to get good sleep, trying to eat a sort of healthy, balanced diet, trying to stay physically active, trying to find little moments of connection, being willing to ask for help when needed. They seem kind of simple, but actually those are the foundations, I think, to sort of take steps forward.
Oh, Mark, I just love that so much, and I agree. We know for certain that depression often really, we call it learned helplessness, but it's a total lack of motivation. Nothing feels worth doing, and you don't often have the energy to do even the simplest things. And then you can start to judge yourself or condemn yourself for that. Please don't do that. And if you do that, forgive yourself for the judgment or the condemnation. And like you said, my mom, when I was really going through a tough time, she would always say, honey, would you just go outside and take a walk? And I would say, Mom, how's that going to help? How's taking a walk going to fix all my problems? I'm nowhere in my career and I have no relationship and all these things. And she'd say, honey, just do it for me. It's fine. I'd muster up the energy and I'd go for my walk. And I would honestly, genuinely feel better. But she'd have to remind me every day. So please know that we all get how hard it is and how difficult it is to find the motivation. And if you can just start with some of those foundational things that Mark mentioned, you'd be surprised if you can remain consistent how much progress you'll make over time.
Thank you. Shabra's got an interesting question here, which comes back to your point about connectedness. So the question is, when I'm feeling down, I feel like I should keep away from other people. How can I overcome this? And I actually think this is something that COVID and the pandemic and our lockdown response hasn't helped, which is we've sort of got out of the habit of connecting. I mean, I've found when I've got back into social situations that it feels a bit more alien. And like there's a lot of people I think who've sort of slipped through the net, a lot of kids who are no longer going to school, a lot of people who are now disconnected in their communities. And so it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if you're feeling low, you don't reach out, you then miss that boost of connection. I really feel that, Shebra. So any tips for how to kind of overcome that reticence, like when we're feeling low, to reach out?
Yeah, it's such a common experience, most of us. When you're in a low mood, you want to distrust your low mood. You want to distrust yourself when you're in a low mood because it colors every experience that you have. And often the things that will be most helpful are the things you're least interested in doing or least believe can help you, right? And so I would say, without question, connecting with other people when you're in a low mood, not always, but if you're depressed and you're spiraling and you're really struggling, I know I'm an introvert. I was voted most shy in my high school class. The last thing I would want to do, even when I'm feeling good sometimes, is connect with people, and especially when I'm depressed. But that's the one thing, or one of the many things, that you most need to do, even a little. You don't have to do it in person. Maybe it's a text conversation. Maybe it's over the phone. Maybe it's joining a group like this and keeping your video off, or whatever it is, right? You can sort of customize it for yourself in a way that's a little more comfortable for you. But I do agree, there's something really powerful about being in the presence of people or animals or small children. You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to talk about, and you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. But you will find that if you can learn to distrust your low mood a little and do some of these things that science has proven and our lives have proven can be helpful, you'll find yourself feeling better over time.
I've never heard that before. I really like the idea of distrusting your low mood, sort of, because you're getting like fake news, really, aren't you, from your emotional environment? You're getting like a sense that things are less good than they are, or that you can't change something. It becomes a self-reinforcing sort of bubble that you're in a way.
It's such a great metaphor, Mark. I love that. It is fake news. It's like self-propaganda. It's propaganda that you pull on yourself. And so you want to be careful of that. We can all be guilty of that. But particularly when you're in a low mood, you'll find that everything looks poor. Everything looks bad.
There's that meme I saw shared the other day that says, "Don't believe everything you think." I think that's particularly relevant when you're in that sort of self-critical mode. Thank you. That's inspiring. Judy, who I know is another regular with Active Happiness activities, has said, I'm a business coach, and with the backdrop of COVID and Ukraine and my work, I feel as if I have compassion fatigue when it comes to listening to friends when they open up. And I think this is, I mean, thank you, Judy, for raising that. And I think it's something we see in the health service a lot, particularly people who are dealing with a lot of suffering. It can be really overwhelming, and we almost risk dehumanizing and sort of disconnecting from people suffering. Like seeing one death or loss is overwhelming, but when it's 10,000, you sort of turn off a bit. So I think I don't think there's a simple answer here, but what do you think about compassion fatigue, Robert?
Oh, that's a real thing, no question about it. I've probably never been more swamped in my life, business-wise, as I have been during COVID. I'm both really sad about that because I don't like people suffering, and I'm also grateful that I can be of any assistance at all. And most of the coaches and therapists and other helping professionals I know, nurses and doctors and massage therapists, are feeling lots of that. No question about it, right? And that's leading to a lot of the burnout. So it's real, yes. And there is a way, first of all, you want to honor that. And so you want to set some boundaries. You want to make sure you're taking care of yourself first and foremost, because if you don't take care of yourself first and foremost, and we lose you, because you're burnt out, then we also lose everyone who is leaning on you for support and help, right? So you got to take care of yourself first. Second, it kind of comes back to this point around holding space for people and being in the conversation, but not being lost in the conversation, right? So you can be in the conversation, but not be lost in the conversation. You want to always maintain awareness and contact with that place inside that is full of perfect peace. That's why it's so critical. It's easy to try to get in there and do too much. As a coach, my first 15 years, I was getting in there and trying to do too much. I'm trying to pull them out of their depression. I'm trying to change their mind. I'm trying to persuade them to do this other thing. There's too much. It's like, if I can just sit and remain resting in this deep peace and presence, the situation often changes all by itself. The person comes to realizations all by themselves, right? And it also means, so it means both things, right? It means both doing this inside out thing, but it also means taking this outside in approach where you say, today I'm exhausted. I just need to rest. I need to nap. And maybe tomorrow too, and maybe the next month as well, until you feel good again.
We're running out of time, sadly. Robert, it's been such a joy spending time with you. Thank you, everyone, for all the questions that you've asked. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for everyone who made a small donation to Action for Happiness to help support these events. If you've enjoyed this and you haven't had a chance to do that already, there'll be a link in our follow-up email. So please do contribute and help to keep this community alive. Robert, we're so grateful for your time. I'm going to share in the follow-up email tomorrow links to your website and your fantastic book. But I wondered if I could invite you to sort of sum up how you're feeling now, maybe leave us with a final thought.
Yeah, I feel so grateful. I just feel so deeply grateful. I am so grateful for you, Mark. I have shivers right now. I feel emotional about it. I struggled so much in my life because I couldn't have this conversation. There was no one I could have this conversation with. And that was just as much up to me as it was anyone else. So I don't blame anyone for that. So thank you. And thank you for everybody participating and that it's part of this incredible community, because it's what we need most in this world for each other, but also for other people who aren't even connected to the community. So that's the first thing I'll say. And the other thing I'll simply say is that it's an extraordinary life if you don't overthink it. Okay, it's an extraordinary life if you don't overthink it. So do what you can to practice whatever principle resonates with you most deeply. It can just be one thing. One thing can take you all the way home. For me, it's the exercise piece and it's the daily habits, but most of all, it's just having moments here and there where I don't think, where I just show up and for 5 minutes or for 5 seconds, I'm just like an idiot or like a small child or like an animal. I just enjoy being, period. Just enjoy being, right? So you don't need to think your way through life. And if you've noticed, life has its own logic anyway. So it's an extraordinary life if you don't overthink it.
What a beautiful note to end on. Robert, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone all around the world who's joined us and been part of this today. So grateful. Keep up the inspiring work and look forward to staying in touch.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mark.